Chris, the problem of evil in the world is one of the major arguments against the existence of God. Philosophers and theologians who believe in God generally refer to human sin and immorality as a reason for evil. But this leaves the whole area of natural evil unaccounted for. Earthquakes, tsunamis, disease, all the things that human beings don't do. How do you account for natural evil?
I think the first thing to say is that within a lot of those types of natural evil that you mention, there are aspects of moral evil as well in terms of human thoughtlessness and negligence and sometimes indeed exploitation.
But not all of them.
No, I don't minimize the problem. The problem is a huge one, but let's not conceal from ourselves that human irresponsibility is often a factor, and particularly when very poor countries are afflicted by natural disaster. But there is a huge problem here, and a proper charge against God, if you like, which
I do like,
which theologians have always had to wrestle with. I think it's an area where the picture that the sciences gives us does help us quite a bit, not least in that we can now see that the sort of tectonic activity that gives rise to earthquakes and often to volcanoes, that was part of making the earth the amazing place that it is in terms of fruitfulness for life, abundance and diversity of life. Without those sorts of processes, life on this planet might have been a very simple and primitive affair. So we can see that actually it's the same processes that give rise to fruitfulness and abundance of life that also sometimes give rise to terrible and unexpected suffering. So we can see that natural evil shouldn't be regarded as a sort of arbitrary punishment from God, but as part of the overall creative process that God has used on this planet.
That seems very nice for all those other people or those other species that benefit, but for the people who suffer and die and have whether broken limbs or orphan children, it seems pretty horrible.
Oh, I don't minimize the terrible character of these disasters, and we're all too aware of these in the contemporary world. So I'd want to say, first of all, that God is present in each of those situations, that God has a care for each person, however dreadful a state they may be in, that every person meets with God at their death, and also that there is, I believe, for every human being a redeemed and fulfilled existence with God, so that all acute and horrible as the suffering is, it's not the end of the story between God and human beings.
Do I hear your claim to be that unless there is some life after death and some fulfillment beyond this life, that natural evil cannot be explained in terms of a loving God?
I don't think any of the Christian arguments in relation to evil, either natural or moral evil, I don't think any of those arguments will function without what's called a doctrine of secondary goods, a sense that God has more for human individuals than just this life.
So let's go back to the concept that the natural evils of earthquakes and tectonic shifts that cause volcanoes are or were critical to create the diversity that we now have. Are they still necessary to be part of the system? Couldn't God have designed it to where they worked that way for a while, and then when we had all the diversity in human beings, whatever God was interested in creating, then they stopped? Or they have to go on forever?
I believe God is faithful to the processes that God has created. So in this phase of the universe, those processes continue. But what the Christian conviction is that following the cross and resurrection of Christ, we are entering a new phase in which ultimately there will be transformation to a place where there is no more of this type of distress.
Let's go back to God's thinking before he created. We can't use the word before quite, but you'll give me the liberty to use before. And so, was God 100% sure that the processes that he set in motion, he or she, enabled evolution to occur, that enabled this great diversity? Was God 100% sure that all of this natural evil would have to occur?
Well, if you believe that God loves the world and loved the world indeed to the extent of sacrificing his own son for that world, then I think you have to conclude that God would not have inflicted on that world unnecessary, gratuitous suffering or pain. So you have to conclude that this sort of creative process is as good a process for creating value as there could be.
So here's how I see it. God exists. God is the creator. God created this system that has all this natural evil in order for purposes. Therefore, God created the natural evil. How do you see it?
Yes, I think one has to say that God created a world with processes that would give rise both to great good and to suffering. Yes.
And God knew this 100% sure when God created it.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Now, why do many theologians disagree with you and I? Because they would say that they won't say that. They won't say that God created that natural evil. They'll say that it was possible or inevitable, but not necessary. But God, it was some probabilistic thing. They just want to make God not create the evil because they're very upset with that. Why?
I think they haven't altogether faced either the integrity of the scientific account, which tells you that you can't have the one thing without the other, nor have they faced the difficulty that if this wasn't God's activity, whose activity was it? And that, it seemed to me, a much more problematic issue for Christian theology than facing squarely the ambiguity of the natural world.
Having thought about this for a long time, the process of natural evil, how have you come out personally in terms of your confidence level in your justification of an all-powerful, all-good God having a system that allows or creates all this evil?
I think theologians shouldn't be too confident about assembling tidy systems in the area of the problem of evil. And of course, always the first response to suffering must be the response of care and relief. But I think I think we are called to use our intellects and imaginations to try and puzzle out the ways of God, and that's what I seek to do in this area, making use as much as possible of the insights that we get from science.